Before we start the meeting, request everyone to please raise for the institute motto followed by national anthem. And request everyone to please keep your phone on silent mode. गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गावे तब जय गाथा नमन मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे भारत माता की। Thank you, friend. Be seated, please, and welcome back, friends. Today, really a very, very special day for all of us. First of all, we have received JB Nagar Study Circle received Best Appreciation Award from WIRC. We request everyone to give a loud applause. Certificate there. One who want to take a photo with certificate can take in break. And also we have received and friend. Today is International Women's Day और मैं इस अवसर पर हमारी स्टडी सर्किल की सभी महिला सदस्यों, महिला प्रोफेशनल्स और समाज की सभी प्रेरणादायक महिलाओं को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। फ्रेंड, महिलाएं केवल परिवार की ही नहीं बल्कि समाज और प्रोफेशन के भी एक मजबूत आधारशिला है एवं चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंसी प्रोफेशन में भी महिलाओं का योगदान निरंतर बढ़ रहा है। आज आप देख रहे हैं कि हमारे हर क्षेत्र में महिला आगे से आगे आ रही है। आप हमारी पिंकी मैडम को देखिए, जिन्होंने अब जेबी नगर में आज महिला के रूप में एक अपना जो अलग स्थान बनाया हुआ है।
सर पिंकी मैडम आ गए मतलब पूरा डबिया है क्या?
यस, क्योंकि दोस्तों नारी केवल एक शब्द नहीं, एक शक्ति है, एक प्रेरणा है। और इसी भावना के साथ आज इंटरनेशनल डे के अवसर पर मैं सभी महिलाओं को हार्दिक बधाई देता हूं, क्योंकि नारी शक्ति है, नारी सम्मान है, नारी से ही रोशन है हर घर और जहान। उसकी मेहनत, साहस और समर्पण को नमन है। आज के दिन हर नारी को हमारा प्रणाम। एंड सेकेंड स्पेशल डे है, आज हमारी ईजीएम है। और इस ईजीएम में हमारे नए संचालक और सह संचालक की हम नियुक्ति करते हैं। ईजीएम चालू करें?
यस।
ओके। तो दोस्तों, पुनः आप सभी सम्मानित सदस्यों को इस एक्स्ट्रा ऑर्डिनरी जनरल मीटिंग में मैं आप सभी का स्वागत करता हूं। आज की यह बैठक, आज की इस बैठक का मुख्य उद्देश्य हमारी स्टडी सर्किल के लिए आगामी कार्यकाल हेतु कन्वेनर एवं डेप्यूटी कन्वेनर की नियुक्ति करना है। एवं मैं आप सभी को सूचित करना चाहता हूं, हमने सभी मेंबर को ईमेल के द्वारा नॉमिनेशन फॉर्म भेजा था। whoever want to give his service as a convener और डिप्टी कन्वीनर, एवं इस संबंध में निर्धारित समय सीमा के अंदर कन्वेनर और डिप्टी कन्वेनर पद के लिए नामांकन प्राप्त हो चुके हैं, जिन्हें आज इस सभा के समक्ष प्रस्तुत किया जाएगा। फ्रेंड्स, एज यू नो, स्टडी सर्किल की गतिविधियों को सुचारू रूप से संचालित करने के लिए कन्वेनर एंड डिप्टी कन्वेनर की महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका होती है। नौ, अब मैं प्राप्त हुए नामांकन पत्रों की जानकारी सभा के समक्ष प्रस्तुत करना चाहूंगा। कन्वेनर पद के लिए हमारे पास में एक नामांकन पत्र प्राप्त हुआ है, सीए ललित बंसल। रिक्वेस्ट ललित जी टू गिव मी ब्रीफ इंट्रोडक्शन। माइक दो।
Good morning. Happy Women's Day to all the ladies. Myself Lalit Bansal. I am working as an executive vice president in investment bank for last almost 20 years. Before that, I was working as a CFO in one subcontractor to L&T for 2.5 years. Before that, I was doing my own practice and part-time job in a CFO, basically learning search and figure exercise in Calcutta. So I did my CA in Calcutta, passed in November 2001, and after that I take FCA certificate. Then I converted from corporate roles. So this is basically brief introduction. Happy to answer any specific questions you have. Thank you.
थैंक यू ललित जी। फ्रेंड्स, क्योंकि कन्वेनर पद के लिए सिर्फ एक ही नामांकन प्राप्त हुआ है, अतः मैं सभा की अनुमति से इन्हें निर्विरोध निर्वाचित घोषित करने का प्रस्ताव रखता हूं कन्वेनर के लिए। प्लीज रेज योर हैंड एवरीबॉडी। थैंक यू। डेप्यूटी कन्वेनर के लिए हमारे पास में 2 आवेदन आए। पहला आवेदन सीए भवेश साहब जो किसी कारणवश यहाँ पर नहीं आए हैं आज। दूसरा सीए विजल मोदी। इनको सभी आप जानते ही होंगे। एंड विजल मोदी, हाँ बताया नहीं। इधर आइए मैडम। हाँ प्लीज गिव योर इंट्रोडक्शन टू हाउस।
Good morning, friends. Today is a special day. So, to all women in the house and International Women's Day, happy Women's Day. Myself, CA Vijay Modi, passed the CA in 1998, completed TISA in 2004, and now completed AI level 1 in 2025. As we know that Bhageria is the best study circle for the last 26 years. So my hearty congratulations to every members and to my best wishes to all you. Because of you, the members, the study circle is the highest in the all department. So try my best to develop this. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
And I request House to please दोनों ही डिप्टी कन्वेनर को निर्विरोध निर्वाचित करें। एंड रेज योर हैंड। थैंक यू सो मच।
प्रपोजल से कैंडिडेट का नाम लिख लीजिएगा।
हाँ
पंचा जी आप प्रपोजल से कैंडिडेट में
Propose किसका है?
आप
Proposed by
पहले बंसल जी का वो तो देखिए ना और पावेश जी का तीन बार लिख तीन लोग किया चर्चा।
and friends, it is our privilege to let our own member, regional council member, Pinky Madam is here, and I request her to say 2 minutes for our blessing of future convener and deputy convener. Madam, please.
गुड मॉर्निंग। सब फैमिली के साथ बैठे हो, थोड़ा सा चेयरफुल आवाज में गुड मॉर्निंग। बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है, आज बहुत सारी फीमेल्स भी हमारे साथ हैं। एंड हैप्पी विमेंस डे। विमेंस डे के लिए अभी आज सुबह में हम लोग WIRC में वोकेथन था कांदीवली सुबह 6 से, तो हम पहले वहीं जाके आए। तो सॉरी फॉर लेट कि वहां से घर आके चेंज करके फिर आना था इधर। तो एंड हैप्पी वुमेन्स डे का मैं तो ये समझती हूँ जिस दिन भी वुमेन हैप्पी है वही हैप्पी वुमेन्स डे है। तो हमारे लिए तो हर दिन हैप्पी वुमेन्स डे हो सकता है यदि हम हर दिन हैप्पी रहे। एंड जहां तक कैलाश जी ने कहा कि हम मेरे लिए वो बहुत प्रेज करते हैं, मेरे अच्छे फ्रेंड भी हैं, बड़े भाई भी बोल सकते हैं, लेकिन मैं ये बोलूंगी हर नारी के पीछे टीम होती है, हर आदमी के पीछे भी टीम होती है। अकेला आदमी कुछ नहीं कर सकता। मैं भी यहाँ पर जब आती थी तो ऐसे ही अटेंड करने आती थी। महेश जी ने, लोढ़ा जी ने, संजीव जी ने, मनीष जी ने पीछे लग लग के हमें कोर कमेटी में लिया, फिर डिप्टी कन्वेनर, फिर कन्वेनर। कभी सोचा भी नहीं था कि इस लेवल तक पहुंच सकते हैं, बट इन लोगों ने बहुत मोटिवेट किया, बहुत पॉलिसिंग करी, हमारी गार्निशिंग करी, तब हम उस लेवल तक जा पाए। फिर भी जब WRC भी इलेक्शन लड़ना था तभी भी मन में था कि पता नहीं कर पाएंगे नहीं कर पाएंगे। उस समय भी पूरे आप लोगों के मेंबर्स का जो सपोर्ट था, हमारी टीम का जो सपोर्ट था, तो उसमें हिम्मत हो पाई। प्लस मेरे हस्बैंड कृष्णा जी जो यहाँ बैठे हैं, तो क्योंकि आज हम सुबह यदि 8:45 पे यहाँ मीटिंग स्टार्ट करते हैं, कन्वेनर या डिप्टी कन्वेनर चाहे वो मेल हो चाहे फीमेल हो, घर पे यदि कोई संभालने वाला होता है तो ही हम यहाँ आ पाते हैं। मेल मेंबर भी तभी आ पाते हैं यदि उनके घर में कोई फीमेल उसको सपोर्ट कर रही है, घर को देख रही है, तो ही। तो दोनों ही एक दूसरे के पूरक हैं। तो मैं तो यही बोलूंगी कि सब ये जो भी कैलाश जी ने कहा,
नॉर्मली बोलते हैं हर सक्सेसफुल आदमी के पीछे एक औरत खड़ा होता है। आई कैन प्राउडली से कृष्णा इज आल्सो माय फ्रेंड। पिंकी की सक्सेस के पीछे 100% कृष्णा का
100 नहीं है, 50 बोल सकते हैं। 50 ये मेरी जो एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली है उनका है।
बोलेंगे ये
क्योंकि जब इतनी एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली का सपोर्ट मिल रहा था तो ये अपने आप ही सपोर्टिव हो गए कि हाँ जब इतने लोग हैं साथ में तो कर सकते हैं। तो जैसा कैलाश जी ने बोला कि नारी के जितने भी गुण हैं, जितनी भी शक्तियां हैं, हम सबको, यहाँ जितने लोग बैठे हैं सबको पता है। ऐसा कुछ नहीं अलग से मैं बता सकती हूँ कि नारी की क्या क्या शक्तियां, सबको पता है। लेकिन कहीं ना कहीं वो दबी रह जाती है। हम अपने आप को पहचान नहीं पाते कि हम में ये भी एबिलिटी है, हम ये भी कर सकते हैं। तो कोई ना कोई होता है जो पहचान लेता है कि हाँ, वो बोलते हैं ना, निखार लेता है कि हाँ इसमें ये है, स्पार्क है, ये कर सकते हैं। तो हम भी ऐसे स्पार्क ढूंढते रहते हैं क्राउड में कि कोई हमें मिल जाए, और भी जो हम और हमारी कोर कमेटी भी बढ़ा सकें। आगे के लिए हम कन्वेनर, डिप्टी कन्वेनर के लिए भी और कोऑर्डिनेटर्स के लिए भी उनको मोटिवेट कर सकें, यहाँ ला सकें। तो जितने भी यहाँ मेल मेंबर फीमेल मेंबर हैं, जो भी हैं, मैं सबसे रिक्वेस्ट करूंगी कि आप लोग भी थोड़ा आगे बढ़िए और यहाँ पर आके देखिए। और कुछ नहीं, मतलब ये मत समझिए कि पॉलिटिक्स है या कुछ भी है। सेल्फ इंप्रूवमेंट, सेल्फ डेवलपमेंट होता है यहाँ आने के बाद में। प्लस आप लोगों का सबका जो प्यार मिलता है वो एक अलग बोनस पॉइंट होता है उसमें। तो इसके लिए आप लोग भी आइए। और जितने भी मेल मेंबर, उनको यही बोलूंगी, आप लोगों को पता है आपके यहाँ जो भी फीमेल है उनकी क्या शक्ति है, उनमें क्या एबिलिटी है। तो प्लीज सपोर्ट देम टू कम आउट ऑफ देयर सेल। क्योंकि अभी जो मैं देख रही हूँ, मैं थोड़ा 2 मिनट लूंगी कैलाश जी, क्योंकि अभी जो मैं जहां जहां जा रही हूँ ना, वहां मैं ये देख रही हूँ कि 40 से 50 ईयर्स के बीच में फीमेल्स डिप्रेशन में जा रही हैं, 40 के बाद। वो मैं इसलिए भी बोलना चाह रही हूँ क्योंकि क्या हो रहा है कि पहले ज्वाइंट फैमिली होती थी, फीमेल्स घर का काम में बिजी रहते थे, तो कोई भी थॉट्स नहीं आते थे। तो मतलब कुछ थॉट्स ही नहीं आएंगे तो डिप्रेशन में आप जाओगे ही नहीं। इतने सारे फेस्टिवल हम साथ में मनाते थे, तो कभी कुछ बनाना है, कभी किसी फेस्टिवल की तैयारी करनी है, कभी घर में गेस्ट आ रहे हैं, कभी कोई फंक्शन, तो दिन भर फीमेल्स बिजी रहते थे। अभी सब न्यूक्लियर फैमिली में हो गए। बच्चे भी 40 तक बड़े हो जाते हैं, उनको भी अपना पर्सनल स्पेस चाहिए। आप उनको बीच में डिस्टर्ब करने जाओ तो वो बुरा मान जाते हैं। तो जो फीमेल शुरू से अपनी फैमिली के लिए जी रही है, 40 ईयर्स में आके वो अकेली पड़ जाती है। क्योंकि ना तो वो उसका बच्चा सुन रहा है, और हस्बैंड से तो वैसे भी वो फैमिली और बच्चों को देखते देखते थोड़ा, बस हाँ खाना खाया, घर आ गए, कब आ रहे हो, क्या खाओगे, उतनी बात रह जाती है। जो सबको ही फील कर रहे होंगे ये चीजें। तो इसीलिए मैं ज्यादातर फीमेल्स को और उनके जो मेल पार्टनर उनको यही बोलूंगी कि प्लीज अपने आप को एक्स्ट्रा एक्टिविटीज में भी थोड़ा बिजी कीजिए। चाहे वो सोशल एक्टिविटी हो, चाहे आपकी हॉबी क्लासेस हो। तो 40 के बाद में आपको अकेलापन नहीं लगेगा, और आप डिप्रेशन में, एंजाइटी में नहीं जाओगे, जो अभी बहुत ज्यादा हो रहा है फीमेल्स में। अपना एक सोशल सर्कल बना लीजिए। कभी सिंगिंग की क्लास है, किसी को डांस अच्छा लगता है, किसी को कोई भी ऐसी एक हॉबी जिंदा रखिए अपने में। और यदि कई लोगों को मैंने फीमेल्स को देखा है, वो खुद है बहुत लेकिन जाना नहीं चाहती, तो उनके हस्बैंड को, उनके सेकंड पार्ट को बोलना चाहूंगी, आप उनको मोटिवेट करो कि 1 घंटा दिन में अपने लिए निकाले। वो 1 घंटा आगे के लिए बहुत काम आएगा, मेंटल हेल्थ के लिए। क्योंकि मैं इतना इसलिए बोल पा रही हूँ क्योंकि मैंने देखा सब अपनी अपनी फैमिली लेके आ रहे हैं। दैट मीन्स उतने सपोर्टिव हो कि अपनी फैमिली को लेके आए हो यहाँ पे, और उन्हें भी समझ में आ रहा है कि सुबह 8:45 पे उठ के जाते हैं तो कुछ मजे करने नहीं जा रहे, कि घर में आपकी नहीं सुन रहे तो किसी और की सुन रहे हैं, लेकिन सुन रहे हैं। तो ये भी इतना इजी नहीं होता कि 8:45 पे यहाँ आके बैठ के किसी की सुनना 2 घंटे बिना हिले डुले या वैसे बिना नींद के झपके लिए। तो आई वॉन्ट टू कॉन्ग्रेचुलेट यू ऑल अगेन, एंड हमेशा ऐसे ही हंसते मुस्कुराते रहिए जैसे अभी दिख रहे हैं। तो हर दिन हमारा हैप्पी वुमेन्स डे रहेगा। एंड आज फिर शाम को मैं आप लोगों को सबको इनवाइट करूंगी। हमारा अभी WRC में पूरे दिन का इवेंट चल रहा है वुमेन्स डे का। तो अभी सुबह वॉकेथन हुई, फिर अभी 6 घंटे के टेक्निकल सेशन है, उसमें मेल मेंबर फीमेल मेंबर दोनों आ सकते हैं क्योंकि टॉपिक ही ऐसे रखे हुए हैं। एंड उसके बाद में 5 बजे से कल्चरल इवनिंग है जिसमें हमारे JB नगर की फीमेल CA ने भी पार्टिसिपेट किया है, एंड वन ऑफ द पार्टिसिपेट इज बीजल ऑल्सो। सो तो 7 और 8 फीमेल CA प्रैक्टिस कर रही हैं लास्ट 2 वीक से डांस के लिए। तो यदि आप लोग आ सकते हैं तो आइए जरूर। कांदीवली 13 पंथ में ही है, 5 PM से स्टार्ट है और फॉलोड बाय डिनर। थैंक यू एंड विथ आई वांट टू कांग्रेचुलेट आवर न्यू टीम कन्वीनर साहब ललित बंसल जी। Congratulations and all the best for your future tenure, and बीजल एंड भावेश भाई इन एब्सेंसिया, ये तो हमारे सपोर्टिव टीम है ही। सो जो भी काम हमारे WRC से हमें हेल्प लगती रहेगी, इसीलिए मैं अभी थोड़ी इनको मस्का पाली कर रही हूँ। आगे मतलब WRC इनको क्या हेल्प मतलब ये मैं प्राउडली बोलती हूँ कि स्टडी सर्कल से WRC को कोई हेल्प मिले नहीं मिले, WRC से स्टडी सर्कल को बहुत हेल्प, मतलब WRC को स्टडी सर्कल से बहुत हेल्प मिलती है। जितने भी बड़े प्रोग्राम होते हैं बिना बड़े स्टडी सर्कल के सपोर्ट के रजिस्ट्रेशन लाने या पब्लिसिटी करनी पॉसिबल नहीं हो पाती है। तो यस, तो मेरे सब लोग यही बोलते हैं पिंकी केडिया मतलब JB नगर, और यहाँ आ रही हूँ तो सुना कि पिंकी केडिया मतलब WRC। तो तो थैंक यू एंड विश यू ऑल द बेस्ट।
थैंक यू पिंकी मैडम फॉर योर मैसेज एंड सपोर्ट। और मैं कृष्णा से यही बोलूंगा कि हालांकि आज उसने जो है कम बोला है, लेकिन क्या है कि ये इसको घर पर बोलने का मौका नहीं देता है।
ये यहाँ देखिए आप
Now, friend, technical session will be start with fundraising. Money, money, money. क्योंकि मैंने कभी ये पढ़ा था कि अकॉर्डिंग टू हॉटले विदर्स, मनी इज व्हाट मनी डज। और आज मनी क्या करती है, हाउ टू रेज द मनी, इसको बताने के लिए हमारे पास में हमारे ऑन स्पीकर हैं मिस्टर अंकित भगेरिया। फ्रेंड्स, एज यू नो, एक CA के रूप में भी फंड रेजिंग की प्रक्रिया में हमारी लगातार भूमिका रहती है, चाहे वह वैल्यूएशन हो, ड्यू डिलिजेंस हो, स्ट्रक्चरिंग हो, कंप्लायंस या इन्वेस्टर के साथ में डील स्ट्रक्चर का विषय हो। इसलिए आज का विषय हम सभी प्रोफेशनल्स के लिए अत्यंत प्रासंगिक और उपयोगी है। फ्रेंड्स, मिस्टर अंकित भगेरिया जो फंड रेजिंग और कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चरिंग के क्षेत्र में गहरा अनुभव रखते हैं और कई बिजनेसेस एंड स्टार्टअप को फंडिंग जर्नी में मार्गदर्शन दे चुके हैं। एंड आई एम श्योर आज का ये सेशन हम सभी को प्रैक्टिकल इंसाइट्स और नई दृष्टि प्रदान करेगा, क्योंकि फ्रेंड्स, सफर आसान नहीं होता मंजिल तक पहुंचने का। रास्तों में कई मोड़ और चुनौतियां आती हैं, पर जब सही मार्गदर्शन मिल जाए तो सपनों को भी उड़ान मिल जाती है। एंड वो अंकित बगेरिया and CA Manali Bhageria. Manali ji, please take your seat. Now I request our past convener Vijeta Jaiswal to give a brief introduction of both the speakers.
Thank you, Convener sir. And once again, a very happy Women's Day to all of us. And happy Holi also. Abhi gaya hai. We'll be celebrating today later on. So we have two very good speakers, young dynamic speakers, Ankit Bhageria and Manali Bhageria with us. They have over a decade of experience in finance and technology. And the second generation investment bankers, Ankit and Manali, are taking the lead at Optimics Advisors, a 4-decade-old investment banking firm started by none other than our past convener, CA Mahesh Bhageria ji. They work with mid-stage companies for private equity fundraisers, debt syndication, IPO, mergers and acquisitions. And Ankit's career includes working as a corporate finance head at Nykaa, where he stirred the company from startup stage to getting listed with a rupees 5,000 crore plus issue size. Prior to that, he worked at Bank of America, Anand Rathi Advisors, and Oracle Financial Services. He graduated as a computer science engineer, followed by an MBA. Manali's versatile career in finance includes pivotal roles at Kotak Mahindra Bank and Standard Chartered Bank, where she was working with SMEs for working capital and term loans for up to 150 crores. She has also worked with TCS Catering to General Electric. She holds a bachelor's degree in science, followed by an MBA, and is also a semi-qualified CA. So I request CA Jain to come forward to present a memento. And all the dais, please come, the past conveners galaxy, to please come and present a memento to the speakers.
थोड़ा सा सेट हो जाए दूसरा देखिए ठीक है तो लंबा ये तो मालूम है भी आओ ना Yes. Hello.
So today's session has been divided into two parts. This is the formal session, and for the family members of our members, we have a special art and craft section on the other hall. Please request all the family members to proceed towards the art and craft section. Whoever is interested, please proceed for the art and craft section.
Lot of activities are there for kids and ladies. तो जो नाम दिए हैं वो जा सकते हैं जिनको इंटरेस्ट है हाँ जिनको बड़ी कमानी है वो यहाँ पे सुन सकते हैं पास में जा सकते हैं आधा सुन के भी जा सकते हैं थोड़ी माइंडसेट में आ जाएगी प्रश्न हो जाएगा तो वो हो सकते हैं एज यू विश और एक्टिविटी कंप्लीट हो जाए तो आगे फिर वापस बैठ जाएगा the three will be around at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How's the Josh? How's the Josh? Okay, so we'll start the session. It's an honor to be here in present of an esteemed audience. Whenever we think of capital raise, we think of chartered accountants. CAs play a very important role at the backbone while maintaining financial discipline, creating financial credibility of the company and of the promoters. Today, we'll be talking about different avenues of capital fundraise, be it debt, be it equity. On the equity side, there are various avenues, but we'll be focusing more on private equity and IPO. Our objective today is not to get into too much technicalities, but understand from a strategic point of view, to understand promoters' mindset, to understand how a fundraise happens, and what are the critical factors which leads to success and failure of a fundraise. In many cases, promoters believe that fundraise is just about approaching the investors or the lenders, but it is not the case. We have to approach, but with preparedness, with proper company positioning, and with proper credibility. With that, I'll move on to the next slide. The promoter's mindset, as you can see, whenever a promoter starts a business, he thinks of कि क्या धंधा करें, कौन से बिजनेस चालू करें. Then second is पैसा कहाँ से लाएं, and the third aspect is business कैसे आगे बढ़ाएं. So the first question that you see is more of entrepreneurial in nature, which he himself or herself will have to think कि कौन से domain में जाना है उनको. The second aspect, paisa kahan se laye, is very important, which enables rather the first and the third aspect, which is for initial seed capital, paisa kahan se lana hai, and once you have created that product market fit, that company, then business ko kaise scale kare. So for that scalability, getting the right capital at the right time is very, very important. Thinking about the various avenues of funding, as you can see, whenever a promoter starts a business, the most trust and reliable capital is family and friends. Why? Because when you start a business, you don't have any traction, you don't have any history. So in that case, people trust on you rather than your business idea or on something else. So they trust कि आपको पता है, मतलब they know you and they are betting on you, and hence family and friends is the most important seed capital where you can raise funds. Second is venture capital and private equity. Once you have raised, once you have created that business model, created that public market fit, then, and once you have scaled enough, then you can go to venture capital and private equity funds. IPO, QIP rights issue. This comes when you're planning for listing or you are already listed. If you are listed, then probably you can go for an FPO or you can go for a rights issue with the public market funds and public market investors. We'll deep dive more into private equity and IPO later. The fourth aspect is debt, which Manali will be covering. It is in terms of working capital loan, term loan, and other kinds of debt instruments. And lastly, others. So this is a question to audience. What are the other sources of funding which you can think of? Any idea? Grants, okay, very good. What else? Internal accruals, great. Anything else? Okay, so grants, again, it's a very good avenue of fundraise. It can be from private institution, it can be from government. Private institution, for example, Melinda Gates Foundation, or it could be like Dell Foundation. There are a lot of foundations who fund for-profit as well as not-for-profit companies. But the cause should align with their vision. So grants is a very important aspect. And it may not also, it may skip the dilution aspect also. which comes in case of venture capital, private equity, and IPO. Government grants, it could be in form of PLI schemes. So again, government wants to promote a lot of industries. So it could be PLI scheme, it could be tough scheme. So that again is a very important parameter. The third aspect, it could be internal accruals, which one rightly mentioned, which people often miss. So जो आपका business से cash flow generate हो रहा है, rather than giving dividend, maybe you can invest in your own company, reinvest in your own company, and get into diversified lines or expand the existing lines of business. Anything else anyone can think of? Selling of non-core assets. So you are a large conglomerate, large company, and if you feel you have certain non-core assets जहाँ से incremental ROE, return on equity नहीं आ रहा है, so that also you can sell and generate cash flow out of it and then reinvest in the business. Anything else? Joint ventures. So for example, you have the expertise in a particular domain, but you don't have the capital. Likewise, there is a capital partner who has capital but doesn't have the expertise. So in that case, both of you can come together, form a joint venture. It could be 50-50 or any other structure where the other capital partner brings in the capital, you bring in the expertise, and then you can start the line of business. Moving forward, this is a very basic example of a balance sheet. Very, very crude. ये शायद आपने 10th या 12th में पढ़ा होगा. There are two sides to it, equity and liabilities and assets. And here again, I have classified into two basic buckets, non-current and current. This is, I mean, everyone is aware, but I'm going to bring a different perspective to it. Usually what happens is the non-current equity and liabilities, which is like the left side, which is the source of capital, the source of funding, it should be used only for long-term assets as well as short-term assets. So these are application of funds. However, when it comes to short-term liabilities, the short-term source of funding, it should only be used for short-term assets. Why? This model, this asset liability mismatch or match is generally followed by all the financial institutions, be it banks and NBFCs. However, in case of manufacturing companies, trading companies, or any other companies, this is often missed. There are promoters where they see कि short-term liabilities, for example, working capital loan ले रहे हैं 8.5% पे, and they'll say term loan मेरे को 9.5-10% में मिल रहा है. So why not take working capital loan and buy an asset which will yield return in 5 years? Payback period तब देगा. And they'll think कि मैं roll over करते जाऊंगा and मैं manage कर लूंगा. But that is very big mismanagement and it can lead to repercussions. So this is very, very important. And I'll take few examples. Example one, which you can see in red arrows, that is Zomato. So Zomato, if you see the business model, it's a new age company. How it works is basically it is expanding by acquiring new customers and increasing the wallet share within the existing customer base. So वहाँ पे I have highlighted that red arrow is only on the equity side. Why? Because in order to acquire customers, they have to do a lot of digital marketing. So their P&L gets impacted, because of which there are a lot of losses which gets accumulated in the retained earnings on the equity side of things. So hence a down arrow. And in order to fund that, they have raised, like before listing, they have raised a lot of private equity funding. So they are offsetting the accumulated losses by private equity funding. Another example, the second example is that of a listed company called Dixon Technologies. I think everyone is aware. And why is it growing? Because today is it's the era of manufacturing in India. The government is promoting manufacturing. Everyone is moving towards manufacturing. That era, like from agriculture to services was there in India and the manufacturing got missed, but now it is coming up. So you will see their order book is increasing, because of which they have to expand. They have to do a lot of capex and establish new factories. And how are they doing it? I did some research on it and I found out they haven't done QIP, they are not doing rights issue. So how are they raising funds? Anyone, any idea? From this, if you can make out, and from the previous slide which I explained, how are they sourcing their capex? Sorry? Sorry, I missed.
Debts, borrowing,
Borrowings. Okay, that's correct.
some grant.
And some grants. That's absolutely correct. So you can see I have increased the equity part of it. So one is the internal accruals. So they already have a lot of cash flows. They are reinvesting. So that internal accruals, retained earnings is one part of it. The other part of it is the joint ventures, maybe not in the same legal entity, separate, but it's form of equity. So they are forming joint ventures with specialized companies. Then long-term liabilities, as sir rightly mentioned, borrowings. They are taking debt to expand. Short-term liabilities, they are again taking loans, but not term loans, but working capital loans to manage their day-to-day operations, based on which they are funding their capex and their inventory, their receivables.
Take the question.
If you have any questions, maybe you can ask. We'll keep it interactive. Okay, I'll move on. Now, every set of investors, every set of lenders has a different set of expectations, and it happens at different stages in time. So if you see private equity, if a company is good, a private equity may not invest directly. For private equity, the most important thing is uniqueness. What is the differentiating factor? What is the moat? What is a competitive advantage? Even if company is good, they think it's commoditized market, so they may not invest. For them, it is the uniqueness. What is the USP of the company? That is very, very important. And the second aspect, what they look is growth. I'll explain in detail about private equity, why they look at growth. But growth is a very important factor. And when I say growth, it is primarily at top line level, which is at revenue. They look at revenue growth. They look at hyperscale, hyper growth kind of businesses, which has exponential trajectory going forward. Second is IPO. When we come to IPO, the public market investors, retail investors, what they think about is growth, but more than that, profitability. Dhanda profit kama raha hai ki nahi. They will look at the unit economics, and not unit economics going forward, but what is the current unit economics. For them, revenue is vanity, but profit is sanity. वो बस यही पूछेंगे profit क्या है. If you see a listed company's results coming out, quarterly results, the first thing that investors see is क्या profit आया है, what is the earnings, and then they compare the private PE multiple, price to earnings ratio, कि undervalued है, overvalued है, then they re-rate it and the prices go up and down. So profitability is very important for a IPO investor, be it retail or institution. The third one, which we are covering, is the debt aspect. Here, what a lender looks at is profit, कि profitable है कि नहीं, and more than that, they look at the serviceability, कि मैं जो लोन दे रहा हूँ, मेरा प्रिंसिपल वापस आएगा कि नहीं, मेरे को ब्याज मिलेगा कि नहीं, because that's their business model. So they look at profit, but more than that, they look at cash flow. They say कि ठीक है, profit ठीक है, but they'll also look at the balance sheet, कि वर्किंग कैपिटल कैसे मैनेज हो रहा है, कैश फ्लो जनरेट हो रहा है क्या, एंड मेरा प्रिंसिपल इंटरेस्ट आएगा. So for them, they'll say कि revenue, which private equity looks at, that is vanity. Profit is sanity, but for me, it is the cash flow, which is reality. Cash flow आ रहा है, तो मैं lend करूंगा, because even they have fiduciary responsibility towards their depositors or from wherever they are raising funds. So we'll cover the first aspect, private equity. So what is private equity? Private equity is a financial investor who invests in private unlisted companies for a stake in the company. उनका basic motto क्या रहता है? Return generate करना. Is anyone aware about the structure of private equity, how it is structured, LPGP structure? If anyone can raise hands, who's aware? Okay, so I'll explain. Mutual fund structure सबको पता है? How does it work? All of us invest in mutual funds. ठीक है, हमारा पैसा है, आम आदमी का पैसा है, which we are giving to a mutual fund, and there's a fund manager there who is managing our funds. They do a lot of research, they come up with few companies, and then they invest in that, and they keep on tracking. Same is the case with private equity. उनके पास पैसा कहाँ से आ रहा है? From HNIs, ultra HNIs, from sovereign funds, from corporates, from pensions, from insurance companies, and they take large sums of money. In India, the minimum amount a individual or anyone can invest in a private equity AIF is 1 crore rupees. So these are large sums of money coming from a lot of wealthy families and institutions. And then there's a fund manager called general partner, GP, like how we have fund managers in mutual funds. So they manage where to invest and for how long to invest and when to exit. And how is it structured? They manage for an investment period horizon of 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, depending on the structure. Typical structure is 3 to 5 years. तो वो आइडेंटिफाई करेंगे कौन से कंपनीज में इन्वेस्ट करना है. Then they will keep invested of 5 years, unlike a mutual fund, which if they feel कि कुछ गलत हो रहा है कंपनी के साथ और there is some structural change in the market or in the company, they may exit quickly. वहां पे liquidity होता है. But in case of private equity, liquidity is not there. So they have to do a very thorough diligence and then they invest. So that's the structure. And mutual fund में भी आप देखोगे expense ratio होता है. What does that expense ratio include? That is the fund manager's fees, the employee expenses, infrastructure expenses, admin expenses. The same way private equity structure works, it is like a 2 by 20 structure, where usually 2% is the management fee which they take for the infrastructure, admin, employee salary, fund manager salary, and 20% is the carry. And how is it calculated? They'll say कि minimum हम आपको 15% रिटर्न लाके देंगे, लेकिन उसके ऊपर हम लेके आए रिटर्न, फॉर एग्जाम्पल दे गेट 30% रिटर्न. सो 15, 30 minus 15, जो इंक्रीमेंटल 15% रिटर्न है, उसका 20% शेयर दे विल टेक, which is slightly different from the mutual fund. So that's 2 by 20 structure, management fee and carry. The second aspect, what it is. So basically, I have explained all these things. But what is private equity? Is basically they look for long-term growth. They look for exponential growth. What it is not is basically कि आप ये नहीं सोच सकते कि मैंने पैसे रेज कर लिए फ्रॉम प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड, नाउ मैं मजे करूंगा, मैं कहीं पे भी डालूंगा, मैं प्लेन खरीदूंगा, गाड़ी खरीदूंगा, मैं नए लाइन ऑफ बिजनेस में जाऊंगा. नो, इट इज नॉट दैट. इफ यू आर टेकिंग प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड, you have to be accountable. There are a lot of nuances attached to it. We'll cover that in the subsequent slide. Yeah.
Question asked by Betty.
Yeah.
Is there anything where the investor can also get in case of a loss?
Investor can get in case of.
I am an investor. That's a private equity. Now 2% management fees agreed.
Correct.
20% if you want to share, if you are giving me more
on the incremental.
Suppose there is a loss.
Loss, yes.
Then what happens? Is
Yes.
there any commitment from the management?
No. So it's an equity investment. It's not a debt investment. For example, उन्होंने बोला है कि मैं आपको 15% लाके दूंगा. That will be an endeavor. उसके ऊपर आया, so then they'll take that carry. But मान लो 10% return आया, markets are bad. So it's your risk. They won't take the carry, but it's the LP's risk, the limited partners who are investing in the fund. It's like an equity investment. How you invest in stocks.
So the scheme is like only if there is a profit, they will share.
Yes.
If there is a loss, I will put to last time.
Yes. It's equity.
So that is what happens in the PMS.
PMS is also an equity structure. It's the same thing. It's just the PMS manager is managing your money and actively managing, investing in stocks, then selling, buying, selling. And then they take it's the same structure only. Yes. Few examples. I mean, there are a lot of, if you read newspapers, every day you'll see some fund investing in some company. Some of the examples that I have put here is Reliance. If you would have seen, like during COVID, Reliance Jio, Reliance Retail, a lot of funds invested, be it TPG, be it KKR, be it sovereign funds like ADIA, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, or PIF, Public Investment Infrastructure Fund from Dubai. A lot of investors invested in that. Second example is Haldiram, a traditional, we all eat Haldiram ka bhujia, and it's a traditional business. Temasek recently took a 10% stake in that for 8,500 crore. So valuing the company at 85,000 crore. Third example is General Atlantic investing in a fintech company called PhonePe. So there are numerous examples, and there are a lot of types of funds who invest in companies. I have worked across, a lot of funds, closed a lot of deals, be it public market funds, be it sovereign funds. Sovereign funds is basically the large fund. So if you see Temasek is a Singaporean fund. Singapore government का fund है. There is GIC, there is Temasek. फिर कनाडा के बहुत सारे फंड्स है लाइक CPPIP, Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, then OTPP, Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, Norges Bank from Europe. So there are a lot of sovereign funds, there are a lot of private equity funds, be it TPG, KKR, Carlyle, General Atlantic. A lot of funds are available and they are happy to invest in companies, happy to invest in India. But the main motto that they look at is growth and something different, what the company is doing, and whether they'll get exit or not after 5 years, 6 years down the line. Moving on, process and timelines. So generally, if you see a loan will take 1 month's time, a private equity will take 4 to 6 months time, and an IPO may take 9 to 12 months time. So private equity usually is in between. However, and there are a lot of steps involved. First is the preparatory phase. So your preparatory phase includes preparing an information memorandum and a financial model and a teaser. These are the three basic aspects which we look when looking for a preparatory phase. And the most important aspect is positioning. If you feel कि एक कंपनी है, मैंने उसका फैक्चुअल इंफॉर्मेशन लिख दिया स्लाइड में, and then the positioning goes wrong, then you can see like it's almost done. Why? Because if positioning is wrong, then the investor mindset, because that sets the tone for future conversations with the investor, and everything goes haywire. So positioning is very important. If you would have seen movie called Spider-Man, I'm sure most of you would have been. So वहां पे एक dialogue था, with power comes greater responsibilities. I'm sure you would have got that. Likewise, in preparatory phase, with positioning and modeling, financial modeling and projections, comes greater responsibilities because that sets the tone for the investor, that sets the lens through which investor will look at you, will evaluate you. Just taking an example from my previous stint at Nika, we used to evaluate ki are we a consumer company or a technology company or a consumer tech company. And all these three are different. सिर्फ बोलने के लिए अच्छा लगेगा कि अच्छा we are tech company, consumer tech company. However, when you say you are a tech company, you have to deliver that kind of expectations to the investor. Because when you say you're a tech company, the first thing that investor expectation will be there is you will grow very fast. There will be an exponential growth. And with exponential growth, they will give you a very high valuation currently at this point in time. However, the expectation, return expectation will also be high. 5 years down the line, they will either ask you to do an IPO or sell it to other private equity fund, and that growth should be still left in the business. Otherwise, there will be a down round. Valuation come ho jayega. So positioning is very important. Currently, I'm working with a fintech company. So I'm still deliberating with the management. Will you be called as a finance company or a fintech company or a tech company? It doesn't come out like in one meeting. You have to discuss, deliberate what is the genesis, what is the soul of the company. That is very important. Then comes the marketing phase. Once the collaterals are ready, IM, FM, and teaser, then you approach investors. You may approach 20 investors, out of which 3 investors, 5 investors may show interest. Then you start engaging with them, sign an NDA, share more information, upload on data room information, and then comes to the term sheet phase. Term sheet it'll be a small term sheet, 4-5 pager term sheet, where they'll set out the terms for the future phase of documentation. Then is a diligence phase. This phase takes the most time because then you usually hire a big four on the financial diligence side, and there is also a legal diligence. It could be like AZB, it could be CAM. There are a lot of legal firms available on the top tier side, tier 1, tier 2. So you'll hire, they'll take 2-3 months to do diligence on the company. And it could be buy side diligence or it could be vendor diligence. Vendor diligence means the company is hiring these intermediaries, diligence partners, and buy side diligence, they'll hire and they'll do diligence on you. Diligence again is very aggressive. इट्स वेरी वेरी डिटेल्ड आई वुड से, बिकॉज आप देखोगे कंपनी, मैंने इन्वेस्टर को दे दिया रेवेन्यू ये है, ऑडिटेड फाइनेंशियल्स ये है, पूरा मैंने प्रोजेक्शंस दे दिए, बट व्हाट डिलिजेंस विल एनालाइज इज कि मेरा रेवेन्यू है, उसका रेवेन्यू ब्रेकअप क्या है, व्हाट इज अ कॉन्सेंट्रेशन। मेरा रेवेन्यू अगर सिर्फ 3 क्लाइंट से आ रहा है, 80% is coming from 3 clients out of let's say 100 clients, then there's a concentration risk. It likewise if there could be a related party transaction कि मैं बेच रहा हूँ 100 क्लाइंट को, उसमें से 3-4 क्लाइंट जो है वो मेरी ही कंपनी है, so if that business goes, then obviously my revenue will get impacted, my growth will get impacted, profitability will get impacted. So they analyze very diligently contingent liability है क्या, they do a tax diligence कि जितने भी litigation चल रहे हैं या disputes चल रहे हैं, they will assess and identify कि this will be my potential loss, this will be the probability, and this has to be done by an independent external party, based on which the investor takes a call. And last is the documentation phase. So here we have SHA, shareholders agreement, share subscription agreement, shares purchase agreement, depending on primary, secondary round. Again, this takes bit of a time to close. It's more of an elaborated version of the term sheet. Key terms of term sheet. So I mean, there are a lot of terms, but I have covered only a few of them. First is the economics. What does economics cover? Valuation. Any promoter, if raising a fund, they'll ask कि मेरे को क्या valuation मिलेगा and is it as per my expectation. So valuation is very important in term sheet, and it is not that कि मैंने valuation बोल दिया 1000 crore between buyer and company set हो गया, which is done. No, it could be adjusted based on the diligence. Diligence में कुछ negative चीजें आई, so valuation may get adjusted downwards. It may so happen. What are the other factors? Liquidity preference. Anyone, any idea what is liquidity preference? Okay, the word itself suggests liquidity. So for example, मैंने invest कर दिया, company is not doing good, it's going for a liquidity event, NCLT में चला गया, and there is some liquidity proceeds that come out. So how will you bifurcate? So first we'll go to the tax authorities, government authorities, creditors को जाएगा, banks को जाएगा, because they are not equity holders, they are not taking that kind of risk. बाकी जो भी proceeds बचेगा, then it will be distributed among the equity shareholders, which will be comprised of investors and promoters. So what liquidity preference will say is, investors will ask is जो भी बचा है उसमें से 1x of the amount that I've invested, I will get that first, and जो भी कुछ बचता है then promoters may get in proportionate basis. Investors may also 1.5x liquidity preference instead of 1x. So what that means is जो भी मैंने पैसा इन्वेस्ट किया है 1 रुपी, मैं 1.5 रुपए लेके जाऊंगा आउट ऑफ दैट प्रोसीड्स, फिर उसके बाद अगर बच रहा है देन प्रमोटर्स में टेक. सो देयर आर वेरियस नुआंसेस टू इट. कमिंग टू प्रोटेक्शन, व्हाट डज प्रोटेक्शन मीन? It could be in form of reps and warranties, it could be in form of indemnities. Again, this point gets discussed a lot among the investor and the company and promoter, because investor asks कि कुछ भी गड़बड़ हो गया आगे जाके तो आप इंडेमनीफाई करोगे, आपने हमसे छुपाया था ये सारी चीजें पहले से, बिफोर इन्वेस्टिंग यू डिडंट डिस्क्लोज इट टू अस. इफ यू डिस्क्लोज देन आल्सो दे विल आस्क फॉर स्पेसिफिक इंडेमनिटी कि अच्छा ये एक डिस्प्यूट चल रहा है आपका मार्केटिंग एजेंसी के साथ, आपने बता दिया, वेल एंड गुड. इफ कुछ भी फटता है सो देन यू विल इंडेमनीफाई मी, एंड देन अगेन देयर आर वेरियस थिंग्स टू इट कि 5 साल के लिए 10 साल के लिए मैं इंडेमनीफाई करूंगा, और देयर कुड बी अ कैप टू इट कि अप टू 10 करोड़ मैं करूंगा, अप टू 20 करोड़ करूंगा. अगर आपने फ्रॉड किया है तो इट विल बी अनलिमिटेड. There are fundamental warranties, there are company warranties, business warranties, there are a lot of warranties and indemnities which gets negotiated. यहाँ पे lawyers, bankers and company, all three play an important role. Governance. This is the most important aspect for a private equity fund. So when a private equity fund comes in, you will see कि वो board composition change करेंगे. They would prefer कि एक दो independent director हो, committees हो. Usually private companies में there are NRC committee, audit committee, they may not have. But when a PE investor comes in, they force it. And they will also ask for certain board representation from themselves. It could be in form of board seat, or it could be in form of observer rights कि मैं observer रखूंगा. And not only that, they could also ask for कि out of 5 board members मेरे पास एक ही seat है 20%. So I cannot significantly influence the board. However, they'll sign a separate there's a separate chapter in the SHA which is called reserved matters. And what it means is कि आप कोई भी अगला फंड रेज करोगे, you will have to take my approval. आप बोर्ड चेंज करोगे, you'll have to take my approval. आप 100 करोड़ के ऊपर का लोन ले रहे हो, you'll have to take my approval. आप acquisition कर रहे हो, you'll have to take my approval. So these are the kind of reserved matters that they may list down in the SHA. Control. Control could be kind of related, I would say. It is more related to the board only, how they control the board and how they influence the board. Exit. This is very, very important. Again, they list this in the SHA. Exit. Any idea exit कैसे करेंगे private equity funds? Sorry? Selling to another private equity fund, okay. Buyback करेंगे, correct. IPO करेंगे, correct. So these are there. Apart from that, there are few other clauses as well attached to it. So like ma'am mentioned, they will sell to another private equity fund, a larger private equity fund 5 years down the line. So उस case में, for example, currently the private equity investor is holding 30% stake in a company and they go to a larger fund and they say कि ठीक है 30% आप मेरा ले लो. But the new investor says कि नहीं मेरे को 30 नहीं चाहिए, मेरे को तो 50% चाहिए, तो ही मैं लूंगा, नहीं तो मैं नहीं लूंगा आपसे. So how will the company and the existing investor solve that situation? Anyone, any idea? So beforehand only they will draft the clause drag along. So investors, the existing investors पहले से ही term sheet में and SHA में drag along clause जो है वो लिख देंगे, draft कर देंगे. What it means is कि हमें कोई फ्यूचर में इन्वेस्टर नहीं मिल रहा है एंड एक इन्वेस्टर मिला है बट दे वांट अ मेजॉरिटी स्टेक, हम बेच रहे हैं, सो दे कैन ड्रैग forcefully drag the promoter to sell either a proportionate or full of their stake. I mean there are clauses which are drafted accordingly कि full drag करना है, partial drag करना है, so that the existing private equity investor can get an exit. Likewise there is a call put option. Promoter बोलेगा मैं कॉल कर सकता हूँ, which is as good as a promoter buyback or the company buyback, which the sir mentioned. There could also be a put option कि मैं फोर्स कर सकता हूँ कि as a private equity investor मेरे को बेचना है, आपको खरीदना ही पड़ेगा, to the company, to the promoter. There could be a tag along clause. What it means is कि promoter बेच रहा है stake, okay, and then the private equity investor is not comfortable, बोल रहे कि promoter बेच रहा है, there'll be no skin in the game, तो मेरा तो नुकसान हो जाएगा, I'll be at risk, I'll be left in the company. So then they trigger the tag along clause. What it says is कि promoter बेच रहा है तो मैं भी बेचूंगा उसके साथ stake. So I'll compel the promoter to sell my stake also to the same investor at the same price per share. So there are various clauses within exit. IPO के लिए मैं बोल सकता हूँ कि 5 साल बाद आपको IPO लाना पड़ेगा. Then the timelines. Timelines में there are few key clauses like the long stop date, exclusivity. What long stop date means is कि within 60 days अगर transaction नहीं होता है, so the entire transaction will fall away. There could be exclusivity clause which says कि for next 30 days you cannot talk to any other private equity investor. आपको हमारे साथ ही काम करना पड़ेगा. So obviously promoter will ask for non-exclusivity and the PE investor will ask for exclusivity. Then we arrive at a middle ground. There are other factors like jurisdiction. Usually when I dealt with a lot of private equity funds, they ask for Singapore as the venue for arbitration under SAIC rules, Singapore International Arbitration Center. While an Indian promoter, Bombay का promoter बोलेगा नहीं मेरे को Bombay चाहिए, Bombay High Court चाहिए under Mumbai International Arbitration rules, something of that. So that again depends on the negotiation. Okay, quickly moving to the IPO. These are basic aspects which every one of you may be knowing. Why we do an IPO is basically to raise capital for expansion, to diversify into other lines of business, for acquisition. It could be for repayment of debt, multiple purpose, but debt not of promoters. It could be of the banks or lenders. Then liquidity to existing shareholders. It could be promoters, it could be investors. So primary funding भी होता है. There's a OFS component also, offer for sale, that happens in case of IPO. Unlocking value because you get a valuation. प्राइवेट में कैसा है, if you are 100% promoter owned, then you cannot identify the value. You can go to a valuer and get a valuation report done. But उस केस में the true value unlocking and discovery, price discovery doesn't happen, which happens in case of IPO. And there's a continuous price discovery because you will see markets fluctuate हो रहा है every day. Market capitalization of company fluctuate हो रहा है every day. And who's determining it? It is the demand and supply forces in the market that are determining the valuation. So that is the fair market value of the company, which you are getting every second when the company is listed. Acquisition currency. So when you acquire a company, and if your company is listed, so then it acts more of a currency. So if you would have heard of deal HUL acquired GSK's consumer business, Boost, Horlicks, ये सब acquire किया था. So that didn't happen because of the उन्होंने cash payout किया था. It happened because of the stock swap ratio determine हुआ था, and they gave their own stock as currency to GSK. Lastly, it positively impacts the perception also, because आपकी कंपनी लिस्ट होगी तो आपका नाम होगा कंपनी का, and then you get lot of business also out of it. अच्छा. So this, I mean, I'll not talk much about it. The eligibility criteria for green board. People usually think the myth is कि कंपनी को profitable होना चाहिए, कुछ ज्यादा profit होना चाहिए if it's going for a main board, बड़ी कंपनी होनी चाहिए. But profitability is not a key criteria. There are two regulations, Reg 6.1, Reg 6.2. So Reg 6.1 is a bit strict. It talks about profitability, minimum tangible asset net worth, all those kind of things. The only thing, the difference between the two is, if we take Reg 6.1, which is a profitability route, that means companies stable, profitable. And in that case, the retail investors can participate 35% of the overall issue size. NII, which is like the HNIs, can invest 15%, and QIB, the qualified institutional buyer, can invest 50%. However, when the company is loss making or they don't meet these criteria, then the retail portion goes down to 10% and QIB increases to 75%. And why is it so? SEBI says कि आप profitable नहीं हो, so you are not that stable. So in that case, retail investors को ज़्यादा exposure नहीं मिलेगा. You are a risky bet. So in that case, the QIB portion becomes 75%. And in both the cases, within that 75 or 50%, 60% of that QIB portion can be allocated to anchor investor. What is anchor investor? Anyone? Mutual funds, FIIs, that's correct. The only thing difference between a QIB जो allotment के through मिलता है and anchor is anchor में the company can decide. It's at company's discretion to decide कि मैं कौन से investor को allot करूंगी and कितना allot करूंगी. Obviously, there's a minimum 10 crore rupees का allotment, but it is at company's discretion. Retail investors में आप देखेंगे बहुत बार apply करते हैं वो नहीं मिलता है because it's a lottery system. QIB में भी जब investors invest, it is on a pro rata basis. But in anchor, it is at company's own discretion. Typical use cases, Reg 2, Reg 6.2 में आप देखेंगे जो new age companies थी, जैसे Zomato, Nykaa, Swiggy, Policy Bazaar, most of them got listed under Regulation 6.2. Likewise, for SME, criteria is slightly not that stringent, I would say. However, and there are two platforms, BSE and NSE, unlike main board where criteria is almost same for both. But in case of SME, BSE के criteria थोड़े अलग हैं, NSE के थोड़े से अलग हैं. But here again, what I've seen most of the advisors do is they try to fit in कि मेरी company सब criteria meet हो रही है, चलो मैं IPO लेके आ सकता हूँ मेरे client का. But that shouldn't be the case. You should always think of कि company की profitability 10 crore, 15 crore है. It's not part of the regulation. This is just part of the experience I'm saying. कि उस type की companies रहेगी that will get good traction in the IPO when the IPO opens up and will have sustainability. अगर आप 2-3 करोड़ की पैट का IPO ला रहे हैं SME IPO, then it is not that sustainable क्योंकि market is not that liquid. Market making के through वो हो रहा है, liquidity is happening, but not naturally. moving on. So like I mentioned, IPO के लिए timeline is slightly on the higher side. There's a preparatory phase, which is very, very important. Preparatory phase में क्या है? You have to do thorough diligence. You appoint a lot of intermediaries. So for example, in case of Nika, there were 6 BRLMs, book running lead managers. There was Kotak, and उसमें भी there are left lead एक होता है which license with SEBI. So in our case, it was Kotak who was left lead BRLM. Then there was Morgan Stanley, Citi, Bank of America, JM Financial, ICICI. There are a lot of merchant banks, category 1 merchant banks, which are BRLMs. Then there are a lot of lawyers also involved. When it comes to large IPO, there is DLC, Domestic Legal Counsel, representing the BRLMs. There is legal counsel representing the company and the promoters. There is international legal counsel representing the BRLMs, ILC, जिसको बोलते हैं. Then there is legal counsel representing the selling shareholders in case of OFS. So you'll see a lot of legal counsels. There's marketing agency to do marketing, printing. There's a different printing agency. There's a RTA, इधर NSDL और CSDL जहाँ पे भी आपके shares listed होने वाले हैं या जहाँ पे registered है. So there are a lot of intermediaries involved when it comes to IPO. So onboarding them, deciding the calendar of events, project managing them. And इसमें diligence में the only aspect here, the critical aspect is company secretarial diligence happens from inception. आप देखोगे प्राइवेट इक्विटी में लास्ट 3 साल का वो लोग लेते हैं लुक बैक पीरियड एंड देन दे डू द डिलिजेंस. बट इन केस ऑफ आईपीओ स्पेशली सीएस रिलेटेड आइटम्स दे डू इट फ्रॉम डे जीरो. जब से कंपनी इनकॉर्पोरेट हुई है तब से वो पूरा आपका डॉक्यूमेंट्स मांगते हैं. देयर इज अ सेक्रेटेरियल ऑडिटर आल्सो व्हिच गेट्स अपॉइंटेड. देयर आर लॉट ऑफ पीपल इन्वॉल्व्ड. ऑडिटर इज देयर. There is independent chartered accountant who certifies lot of certificates. There again a CA role comes into play, very critical. Second, the diligence phase I spoke about. Then is the DRHP filing with SEBI. They review the DRHP. It's a 400-500 pager document with a lot of details about the industry, about the business. The most important chapter is the risk factor section, where in India, SEBI highlights that a lot. आप न्यूज़पेपर के उसमें एडवर्टाइजमेंट में भी देखोगे, there's a big section of risk, which is very important. In US or any other countries, you won't find that, but India में it's a good thing being conservative. And once I mean SEBI is reviewing, then you do roadshows in India, in US, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, depending on the region, in Europe. So we meet a lot of public market investors, pitch our story कि ऐसे हो रहा है, हमारा बिजनेस मॉडल ये है, आगे जाके हम इस टाइप से करेंगे पूरा. Primarily whatever is there in DRHP, and finally the IPO opens and people invest. Now I'll hand over the mic to my colleague Manali, who will talk about debt. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ankit. So now I will briefly discuss, and a very good morning to one and all present here. I'll briefly discuss about debt as also one of the modes of fundraising, as we just now heard about private equity and IPO. So let's just briefly deep dive into debt as well. So now going forward. So first we'll talk about key sources. So as you can see here, like banks and NBFCs have always been the traditional mode of financing, as we all are aware about. So now, but we'll talk about more sources as well. So banks, like I'm sure a lot of you must be having your clients who are regularly borrowing from banks because that is the primary source of lending. So when companies think of debt, they often think of banks, but in reality today, there are a lot of multiple options beyond debt, which have different risk appetite. Banks are the cheapest source of debt, undoubtedly, but they're also more conservative. So they typically lend where cash flows are predictable and security is available. Banks rely heavily on financial discipline and historical performance. Some examples, as Ankit has rightly mentioned, like the term loans for capex and working capital loans, which banks generally fund. NBFC lending, they typically move faster than banks, and they are slightly more flexible when it comes to more risky assets. But then the cost of capital is also a little on the higher side as compared to banks. So then they are useful when timelines are tight or structures are slightly complex, which probably are not bankable. Examples could be like bridge funding or growth capex. Now, when we talk about structured debt, again, these fall, like the cases which don't fall under bank loans or NBFC lending, they come under structured financing. So then structured debt is where the financing is tailored around companies' specific situations. These usually require careful structuring and understanding of the lender's expectations. Like some examples could be for promoter financing, for acquisition funding, and some special situations. Like say, for example, there was a client who was going through stress and was in need of some funds for turnaround, which could not be funded by a bank or an NBFC. So then we arranged for funding for them from the structured financing, which was slightly at a higher cost. Obviously, it comes one level below banks and NBFCs. Then bonds and NCDs. There are usually larger companies that sometimes raise debts through bonds or non-convertible debentures. These are placed with the institutional investors like the mutual funds and insurance companies or the FPIs, foreign portfolio investors. These require credit rating, documentation discipline, and investor confidence. Then when we talk about other institutions, so these are the ones which don't fall under the above four categories. So they provide capital where banks may hesitate. And these institutions evaluate risk very differently compared to the other four counterparts. And again, these could be for refinancing, for expansion purposes. Different lenders fund risks differently. Understanding which lender fits the situation is often the difference between the success and frustration in debt raising. Now we'll go to the next slide is how lenders think. So these are the primary things which a lender always keeps in mind before lending to any institution. So how many of you have seen a debt proposal being rejected even though the business was profitable? I'm sure quite a few must have. So that's because the lenders think very differently. Lenders are not evaluating only the business. They are evaluating the probability of repayment because what they primarily think is how safe is our money. So when we talk about cash flow stability, lenders like predictability. A company may be profitable, but if cash flows fluctuate widely, then lenders become cautious. Predictability matters more than high growth. Stable businesses are easier to finance than volatile businesses. Examples could be like a lender may be more comfortable financing a manufacturing business than a project-based revenue. So then say a client who used to bid for tenders, I'm giving an example. So there was a client who used to bid for tenders for his business and had his cash inflows coming merely once a year. Although it was a bigger chunk, but there wasn't consistency in terms of cash inflows. So when he was looking for a loan, it was very difficult because the lender did not perceive it as a very good point, since there was no consistency in terms of cash flows. So it's not just the profits that matter, cash flows are equally important when it comes to debt financing. Now, when we talk about leverage levels, so lenders want to see a balanced capital structure. Too much debt increases risk. They want to ensure that the company is not over leveraged and that they are not overstretching their balance sheets. So there could be like an example, there's a mid-sized manufacturing company that approached for a 120 crore debt. The business was profitable, the projections were strong, but the bank rejected the proposal. The problem was not profitability, collateral, or turnover. The problem was high debt. The company had a high unsecured loan from promoters, which created a disproportionate debt to equity ratio, which was not acceptable by the lender because they have certain ratios which have to be maintained as per the banking norms. However, we classified that debt to equity, debt to quasi-equity thereby, which improved the debt to equity ratio, which was ultimately acceptable by the lender. So a lot of times it happens that even the bank officials don't have that much of time where they do in-depth working, of these situations and where the advisor plays a very crucial role in terms of making these workings. So banks don't lend based on how successful a business looks. They lend based on how predictable a repayment looks, because repayment is what matters in terms of debt. Debt servicing ability. So lenders want comfort that the company can service their principal and interest from operating cash flows. Profit is accounting and repayment is cash. So governance and transparency. Financial discipline and reporting quality strongly influence lender confidence. This is where chartered accountant's role comes into picture and plays a very critical role. There was a client who came for a loan of 8 crores. P&L was healthy, balance sheet was healthy, cash flows were healthy, and even projections were healthy. However, the issue was with the clientele list. One of the big clientele was a promoter's group company, which had severe cash flow issues. So as you may logically think, if this group company goes bankrupt, the potential borrowing company will also be severely impacted. So hence, debt proposals have to be diligently evaluated from all perspectives. Industry risk. Even a good company may face difficulty raising debt if the sector is considered volatile. No matter how good the company is, if the sector is volatile, it indirectly somehow will impact the company. Examples could be like any commodity business or any cyclical sectors. Now, management credibility. Last but not the least, and the most important of all is management credibility. I have seen deals falling down just because of the management's intentions not being very clear, even at the last stage, at the disbursement stage. So ultimately, lenders back people as much as they back numbers. Numbers are undoubtedly very important, but even more important is the management. So if the lenders don't get comfort on the management, they don't lend, no matter how good the numbers are for the company. So, for example, there was a client who was into multiple lines of businesses. And we had arranged for a loan for them for one line of business because he wanted to expand into one of his lines of businesses. But then after the loan was disbursed, he utilized that money in his another line of business because banks closely monitor every money that they lend to their clients. So ultimately, the client had to return back that money to the bank because it, as per the norms, that can't be utilized into any other sources. Now, when we talk about covenants, so covenants are silent killers. So debt agreements typically include covenants. These are financial and or operational conditions that the borrower must maintain during the life of the loan. So why debt deals sometimes collapse? That's because in many cases loans get sanctioned, but problems arise later on during the documentation stage and the disbursement stage. So financial discipline requirements. Companies must maintain balance sheet discipline and cash flow discipline. The company should ensure that the debt does not increase beyond a comfortable level. Banks call it leverage covenant. The company should also ensure that its earnings remain sufficient to service its obligations, and banks call it coverage covenant. Reporting obligations. Borrowers must provide periodic financial information to lenders so that lenders are comfortable to continue lending. Loans are approved on optimism but tested on discipline. Security. Depending on the structure, lenders may take security on assets or on shares. Most problems arise not when the loan is taken, but when the covenants are not understood properly. How many of you have seen a bank sanction change during documentation stage? I'm sure quite a few must have. So a loan is sanctioned once, but lender confidence must be maintained throughout. Getting a loan sanctioned is only the beginning of a relationship. Once the loan is taken, lenders expect financial discipline, regular transparency, and continued confidence in the business. Now, where debt proposals usually go wrong, most common scenarios. So, unrealistic projections. Over-optimistic projections reduce lender confidence. Promoters are naturally optimistic about their businesses, but lenders tend to be more conservative. Promoters, when projections look too aggressive or unrealistic compared to past performance, then it raises questions in the minds of the lenders. In debt financing, credibility of projections matter more than ambitious projections. For example, if a company has historically grown at 12 to 15% and suddenly projects 35 to 40 to 50% growth without a clear reason, so then lenders naturally become cautious about it. Poor financial presentation. Sometimes the businesses are perfectly healthy, but the financial story is not presented in a way that lenders easily understand. Lenders need clarity and structure in financial information to assess risk comfortably. When the financial narrative is presented clearly, lender confidence improves significantly. So numbers speak, but the way they are presented determines whether the lenders will listen or not. Incomplete preparation. So I'm sure a lot of you must have encountered like your client saying, "Sir, urgently fund chahiye." But then this is very common, But the problem is that debt discussions often begin only when the company urgently needs money. But lenders prefer preparedness over urgency. So capital is easy to raise when you don't need it urgently. Early preparation gives company options. Urgency reduces your options. Mismatch with lender expectations. Another common issue is that there's a mismatch with lender expectations. Different lenders have different risk appetite and different comfort levels. A proposal that may suit one lender may not be suitable to another lender. So understanding what each lender looks for becomes very critical before approaching them. In debt financing, the right lender is often as important as the right structure. Capital may be available, but it has to be matched with the right set of expectations. So now we have almost done with the debt part, and now I'll just give you one or two examples more to cover this. So there was a client who wanted to raise funds. The business was loss-making, but the books showed a profitable business with good numbers. This is a very rare situation. Any idea why? That's because it is very difficult to raise debt if your numbers are negative, you know. So because debt lenders always ask for profitable numbers. So, but any which ways the business was not sustainable. It's showing, you know, when your books showing your books profits, but when there were actually no profits. So then obviously the business could not survive and it collapsed. Then sharing one more example. So lenders, so in our experience, lenders rarely reject a business because it is weak. More often, proposals fail because something creates uncertainty, projections that look unrealistic, financial information that is unclear, and preparation that is incomplete. Lenders don't reject business, they reject uncertainty. Most debt proposals fail not because the business is weak, but because the structure does not match the lender expectations. That is where collaboration between a chartered accountant and a capital advisor becomes very important. In many successful transactions, CAs work very closely with the advisors to ensure that the financial presentations, projections, and documentation align with the lender's expectations. When the financial foundation is strong, lenders obviously become comfortable. So our role is to translate that financial story into something that lenders understand. Equity investors look for upside, but debt lenders specifically look for downside protection. If any of your clients wanted to raise capital today, one last question for everyone. If any of your clients wanted to raise capital today, which route would you consider first? Debt, private equity, or an IPO? Okay, so basically there's no right or wrong answer to this. It all depends on the company's readiness. Ankit, would you like to take it ahead?
So this last slide is more about investments. So once you have raised funds and you have surplus capital or you want to invest somewhere in the interim, so this slide applies to individuals like us, to treasury of the companies where they want to invest funds. Yeah. I mean, it applies to anyone who wants to invest the surplus cash. So basically this matrix shows expected return versus risk. रिस्क जितना रिटर्न जितना ज्यादा होगा रिस्क भी उतना ज्यादा होगा. रिस्क है तो इश्क है तो रिटर्न्स आना ही है. So basically if you see FD bonds, these are like less risky and obviously they'll give lower returns. If you go slightly up, gold and silver I have put there, but currently obviously it's more on the top side with less risk, but because of the volatility, but generally it lies there. Usually the commodity is gold, silver. Then is the real estate, the yield plus the capital depreciation, a slightly liquid form of that REITs, then mutual funds, stocks, PMS, which Sir was talking about. So those are like slightly riskier assets. Then is the unlisted. So recently you'll see a lot of NSE shares being bought and sold. Then the private equity funds. So it's very risky, but the return expectations are also very high. Then investing in startups. Obviously, there's luxury goods, like if you want to invest in watches, in paintings, in yacht, and startup. Risk is very high. So if you'll see, only 5%, maybe less than 5% of the startups succeed. Rest of them fail. But then again, जो succeed हो गया, then the return expectation, the returns that is generated is very, very high. So yeah, we are open to questions now.
IPO नया कंपनी कर सकता है और existing company business होना चाहिए.
So basically for doing an IPO, you need to have a legacy of 3 years. Vintage of 3 years is important. लेकिन उसमें कुछ क्राइटेरिया, जैसे आप SME IPO में जा रहे हैं, कंपनी छोटी होती है, वो LLP से फिर कंपनी में फॉर्म हो या फिर IPO लाना है, तो 2 साल LLP, 1 साल कंपनी चलेगा, but 3-year vintage is important. Likewise is the case for debt also, which Manali spoke about. Most of the lenders, majority of the lenders ask for 3 years vintage. That is important. But in case of IPO, company legal structure is important. Private limited, public limited. Once, I mean, it gets listed. So before that, they have to convert to a public company. So that is important. Yeah.
How private companies can raise funds?
Through ICD. NCD. Okay. So there are 2 ways to it. It could be a listed route. It could be an unlisted route. किसी को भी NCD लाना है, so NCD में कौन सब्सक्राइब करता है? It could be individuals like us. तो आप जैसे स्टॉक मार्केट में इन्वेस्ट करते हैं, through your broker. There are a lot of other debt brokers. आप जाएंगे जैसे जिराफ में जाएंगे, या फिर there are a lot of options where retail investors can also invest in NCD. तो आप इन advisors को approach करेंगे who will place it in retail and who will place it with the investors. These institutional investors could be either mutual funds or could be companies, it could be families, friends, it could be anyone. And the listed route में क्या होगा? Listed route में again the same thing will happen, but it will be more on the institutional side, less on the retail side, because इनका थोड़ा सा slightly higher side पे होता है ticket size. But I mean, if you go for a listed NCD route, then it's, I mean, you again have to create that kind of booklet. IM बनाना पड़ता है. Okay. And I mean, you have to rate that NCD. That is very important, rating from a credit agency.
Last.
What exactly the minimum criteria does private equity investors look at? Like, turnover, a business model.
सब चीज देखते हैं. So the evaluation criteria for a, so I'll club it into, I mean, I'll bifurcate into two aspects: venture capital investment and private equity investment. तो जो venture capital investment होता है, that comes slightly early, but they want kind of unique business model, hyper growth होना चाहिए, and they bet more on the promoter and on the idea. But when it comes to a private equity funding, उसके लिए कुछ turnover का criteria as such नहीं होता है, but even a small mid-market private equity fund would invest like 30-40 crore minimum. Then it can go up to 1 billion, 2 billion, $10 billion also. But वो 30-40 crore invest करने के लिए भी they need to see some traction. And when I say some traction, मतलब ऐसा नहीं कि 10 करोड़ की रेवेन्यू को कंपनी को कर रहे हैं. It could be like 50 crore, it could be 100 crore, depending on the industry and the growth. अगर बेस स्मॉल है लेकिन ग्रोथ ज्यादा है, प्रोडक्ट मार्केट फिट है, ट्रैक्शन है, बिजनेस मॉडल एस्टैब्लिश हो गया है, एंड देयर इज कॉम्पिटिटिव एडवांटेज which and they have moats which they believe they can scale the company to the next level, then the private equity investor will invest. I mean, it's very very subjective, unlike debt. डेट में कैसा होता है, बैलेंस शीट देख के समझ में आ जाता है रीपेमेंट कैपेसिटी है कि नहीं. बिजनेस मॉडल इज इंपॉर्टेंट, क्योंकि डेट में कैसा होता है, हम हिस्टोरिकल नंबर्स देखते हैं. इक्विटी में वी लुक एट द स्टोरी, जो मैंने पोजीशनिंग की बात की थी वो, एंड इट इज मोर ऑफ फॉरवर्ड लुकिंग.
थैंक यू अंकित जी एंड मनाली जी. आई नो everyone in mind, every question, many questions, by how to fund raise अभी क्या, तो उसके लिए 1-to-1 अंकित और मनाली दोनों ही है. Friends, the way Mr. Ankit and Mrs. Manali explained the various aspects of fundraising, from understanding funding avenues to investor expectation, structuring and practical insights, was truly commendable. आज के सेशन से यह स्पष्ट हुआ है कि किसी भी बिजनेस की स्टार्टअप की ग्रोथ में सही प्लानिंग और सही फंड रेजिंग की कितनी महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका होती है, और इस पूरी प्रक्रिया में सीए की भूमिका कितनी इंपॉर्टेंट होती है. टू गिव ए फॉरवर्ड वोट ऑफ थैंक्स, आवर invite our deputy and incoming convener CA Lalit Bansal. उसके बाद ये
Thank you for coming, sir. Good morning to all. I would like to wish happy International Women's Day and happy Holi. Even though belated it is, but we are celebrating today only. So in next rooms, activities going on for ladies and kids. So everyone will enjoy. So today's session was from Bhageria family, our own past convener. So basically, so thank you Ankit Bhageria ji and Manali Bhageria, our in-house young dynamic speakers for the session today, first day session, second session we will also be from the Bhageria family. So congratulating the Bhageria family for coming and preparing this PPT on very short notice. So we really thankful to them. So on behalf of Government Civil Service Circle, I propose a hearty vote of thanks and for the speaker, I would like to thank both the members and admin staff. So there is a break for 15 to 20 minutes. And we have just created one selfie point specifically for Women's Day. So specifically Women's Day, women can take selfie, men are also allowed. So thank you. Let's have a break for 15 to 20 minutes.
एक बड़ा एक इम्पोर्टेंट अनाउंसमेंट और है, आज इंटरनेशनल वुमेन डे है, तो जितनी वुमेन आई है और जिन्होंने थोड़ी एक्टिविटी की है वहां से बैग लिया है, उनको किचन का एक आइटम गिफ्ट